Welcome to another edition of the Big News Roundup. I'm Bill Thomas, and here's what's happening right now. Ilhan Omar mouths off against President Trump and accuses him of causing massive bloodshed. A group of foreign-linked Ivy League students calls for death to America as revenge for Iran. President Trump warns Tehran that the big one is coming soon as war in the Middle East picks up steam. And movie star Jim Carrey's new face has fans worried that he's either an imposter or a clone, and we'll break it all down for you coming up. All this and a bunch more right now on the Big Roundup. We have a great deal to get to today, and we'll begin here. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and her far-left radical cronies are unleashing their own version of epic fury on President Donald Trump following his reluctant decision to protect the future of our nation by attacking Iran. Seemingly well before the reverberations from the first bombs had even stopped echoing, ringleader Omar was already standing by and waiting to condemn our commander-in-chief with a bloated and prepared response containing her usual stream of nonsensical gibberish. And as you know, gibberish is her second language. Rather than rally around the flag like a true patriot, the Somalia-born lawmaker instead gets up on her high horse and accuses the president of dragging our country into an illegal and unjustified war against a foe which she claims does not pose an imminent threat to the U.S.
Are you stupid? Are you a stupid person?
You know, in her defense, she may have missed the part where Iran has repeatedly threatened our great nation and the entire world. After boasting that she's someone who's already survived the horrors of war, she then goes on to share her profound wisdom by saying that bombs don't create peace. Actually, they kind of do. That military strikes won't make us any safer. Actually, they will. And that by abandoning diplomacy, we're setting the table for our own destruction. Spoken like a true American. Somebody send that dame a big box of white flags. She's already surrendering. In closing, she stirs up the pot even more by complaining that there's absolutely no moral justification whatsoever for another regime change war. Well, wrong. There's 93 million reasons. That's the population, by the way, of Iran. That children, families, and service members are already paying the price with their lives, and that people are fed up with endless wars based on false promises made to the American public. And I wonder if she's talking about World War I or maybe World War II. On second thought, the Allied powers, I think they won both of those battles. Well, I'm sure she's correct, though, in her mind. You know, as you can most likely imagine, a number of Omar's fellow squad members also finding it extremely difficult to keep their unsolicited opinions to themselves. Zip it.
But all I'm saying.
Among them, the one and only Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, claiming that a lying President Trump is dragging the American people into another war they don't want and predicting that, in the end, its outcome will be totally catastrophic. AOC is totally catastrophic, and our mission in Iran is liberating, but good try, AOC. Not to be outdone, several other well-known lefties are tossing their hats into the ring of dishonor as well. Now, Hanoi Jane Fonda, leading a protest in L.A., comparing the attack to Vietnam and calling the president's actions dangerous, insane, and unprovoked. Which, by the way, should be the title of her new little autobiography. New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani, of course, claiming that Americans are more interested in relief from the current affordability crisis than another regime change war. And gruesome Governor Newsom, who invited him to the party. He says Trump is putting Americans at risk overseas simply because he's unpopular here at home. In the meantime, in a biting online post, Congresswoman Nancy Mace of North Carolina offering her condolences to Omar over the death of Iran's supreme leader, Khamenei, with the Minnesota Congresswoman responding that she sincerely hopes that Mace isn't drunk, again, while using social media. You know, in her defense, Mace was sober, but even if she wasn't, at least Mace can explain to the very last nickel every dollar she's worth. And I wonder if Omar can do that. And as you and I both know, she is somehow worth $30 million. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. Here's the way it all pans out. In life, there are things called belfries. A belfry can be the top section of a tower, often a church steeple. You know, from time to time, bats can be found in these enclosures. Hence the term, bats in the belfry. Yeah, it's a thing. Now, squad members in general, and two of those members in particular, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, or as I call them, the ill one and the rash, they both have brains, allegedly, which are kind of like belfries at the top of their structure. And judging by their comments, they both have bats in their belfries. And to be clear, the Trump administration has just put an end to decades of tyranny in Iran. And in case you didn't know, until this weekend, Iran had only one rock star, the recently expired Ayatollah Khamenei. and a brief synopsis of the former Supreme Leader's greatest hits: mass extinctions, arbitrary detentions and torture, support for militant proxies, you've heard of Hamas, Hezbollah, and more. And effective immediately, all those big hits have just been demolished. Regarding Ilhan Omar's friend and co-conspirator Rashida Tlaib's brilliant little comment, he, President Trump, doesn't care about the Iranian people. I got to tell you, our favorite little congressional rash, Rashida, is dumber than a tennis racket. Now check it out. Iran is right now home to about 93 million people who, for the first time in literally decades, they finally have an opportunity to forge their own destiny, to live their lives freely and openly, and there's nobody on the planet who cares more about the Iranian people than President Donald J. Trump. To my favorite congressional troublemakers, the ill one and the rash, sorry that saving lives and liberating an entire nation by disposing of a murderous dictator thug has been such a burden on your souls. Please accept our deepest condolences. All right, we'll stick with a bit of a related topic now. Turn our attention to a story concerning a threat to our homeland, which many people will likely file under the "I told you so" banner. I told you so. In an extremely ugly, vulgar, and potentially dangerous example of the so-called enemy within, a group of students from one of our nation's top Ivy League universities now calling for death to America following the killing of Iran's Supreme Leader Khamenei by the U.S. and Israeli forces. Shortly after the war began, a well-known anti-Israel student organization called the Columbia University Apartheid Divest Group, or CUAD, released a provocative social media post containing the alarming long-time battle cry of the Islamic Republic. Oh, crying were they? Man up already.
Stop crying. Stop.
Even more disturbingly, when their inflammatory post was soon flagged and removed for being too incendiary, the group simply doubled down by repeating it, saying that nothing can stop the way they feel, and no matter what, their sentiment still stands. Well, for their part, officials at Columbia claim the group has nothing to do with the university at all. That's the good news, that they're illegally using the school's name, and that there's currently no evidence that anyone using the account is either a student, a teacher, a staff member as well on their campus. Nevertheless, this alleged student organization, again, CUAD, just one of our nation's many university protest groups that has previously received extreme praise from the recently departed Supreme Leader for playing a vital role in opening a new front in the anti-Israel resistance movement right here within the U.S. Well, their mothers might disown them, their fathers might hate them, but at least the dead Ayatollah, he was in their camp. So they kind of got that going for them, I guess. In the meantime, a shocking new report claims a number of Islamic hardliners, including many right here in the U.S., now believe that by attacking Iran, President Trump is ushering in the end of the world. In a nutshell, they say the battle has begun from which their Messiah will emerge, that 47 is the ultimate enemy, a.k.a. the Antichrist, and that the final war of Armageddon is now underway. Well, that's the bad news. But the good news is, and check this out, I just saved a ton of dough on my car insurance. More disturbingly, according to reports, many mosques within our homeland from Michigan to Texas calling for victory in this holy war and preaching the destruction of all non-believers, including one mosque in Virginia that's already set up a table of honor for their fallen heroes, such as Supreme Leader Khamenei and the killed leaders of Hamas and Hezbollah as well. That's a dapper roster of leaders that they've chosen for themselves. They're some fine, upstanding folks. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. And here is the deal. As academic institutions of higher education go, Columbia University, reasonably well regarded, and they even offer a PhD program in podcastology. It's where I got my degree. Editor Pranoff, if you have a copy of my diploma, would love to see it. If not, that's okay too. They say it's kind of tough to get in, but if you make the cut and you can shell out about $100,000 a year, after a number of semesters, you'll score yourself a fancy paper or a learning degree. And with that, you're almost guaranteed a $20 an hour job at one of those big giant Amazon factories. Now, to be fair, good grades and rich parents aren't exactly enough to keep the campus humming, so the feds, if you didn't know this, they pick up the slack by forking over about $1.3 billion each year to keep the learning factory in business. So some might say Columbia has a bit of a responsibility to keep those punks off the grounds. And by the way, got to defend the university this time around in that they are stepping up and claiming that the mentally deranged group of wannabe terrorist thugs who are making death threats against the U.S. have absolutely no connection to the campus. Yeah, they're not students. They don't work there. They're just a bunch of dopey losers. However, if nothing else, here at the Big Roundup, we like to think of ourselves as kind of fair and open-minded. Therefore, regarding the brave, young, and talented group of individuals who posted Death to America in Farsi following this weekend's liberation of Iran, I hear you, and I feel your bravado. But instead of hiding in your little bunker and posting threats on X, put your big boy pants on and go a bit further. Go all the way. Go to Iran right now, where tens of millions of Iranians are being liberated, and fight for your cause. Now, my estimation, the U.S., Israel, and 93 million Iranian citizens are no match for your group. After all, you guys hold up signs and post messages on social media. Fear permeates my soul when I merely think about your organization. You are a force to be reckoned with. All right, turning now to breaking developments concerning our nation's war with Iran, including the massive destruction of enemy forces, Tehran's efforts to widen the scope of the battle, and the president's up-to-the-minute view of just how long it's going to take for all of us to get the job done. To begin with, right now, President Trump says our country's military operations against the Islamic Republic likely continue for roughly a month, maybe a little less, maybe a bit more. However, he also says our armed forces are prepared to continue fighting far longer than that if it becomes necessary for us to finish the job of obliterating all of Iran's deadly weapons, eliminating their nuclear program as well, and putting an end to their evil threats once and for all. In the meantime, while top American officials are unanimously defending Operation Epic Surge, the death toll is growing on both sides. And even though Iran is getting the worst of it by far, unfortunately, at least half a dozen of our brave and heroic warriors have already paid the ultimate price by sacrificing their lives for the good of our entire nation. Additionally, the U.S. military now confirming that during the fog of war, 3 of our country's advanced fighter jets were mistakenly shot down by friendly fire in the skies over Kuwait. But fortunately, all 6 pilots ejected safely and survived. Now, for their part, despite suffering enormous losses to their leadership, defense capabilities, and military-industrial complex, Iran continues to take haphazard potshots at every infrastructure throughout the entire Gulf region by targeting oil refineries, ships, and more with their dwindling supply of missiles and drones. Additionally, Tehran is now warning that they've closed the critical Strait of Hormuz waterway, saying that any oil tankers which try to squeeze through their blockade will face the full fury of their wrath. On the other hand, the U.S. military says they've already destroyed nearly a dozen Iranian naval ships near that waterway, which handles basically 20% or about a fifth of the planet's entire oil supply. Meanwhile, both President Trump and his team say that things are going extremely well, that we're well ahead of schedule with the campaign, and that our most severe strikes against Iran, including what he calls the big one, are yet to come. With that, please pray for our armed forces and for the President of the United States. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown, and here is the bottom line, the way we see it here in the newsroom. Now, look, war is hell. We all know that. Nobody likes it. It should always be a last resort. And to that end, the Trump administration did all it could to bring Iran to the table, but the Islamic regime, they failed to negotiate in good faith. For far too long, Iran has threatened to destroy Israel. They've made repeated threats against the U.S. They've terrorized and tortured their own people. And while they got away with murder, literal murder for decades, Iran's leaders have finally met their fate. Back in 1979, you might recall the Iran hostage crisis, and initially 66 Americans were taken hostage at the embassy of the U.S. in Tehran, with 52 of them being held until January 20, 1981. We'll come back to that date in just a bit. You might also recall that President Carter's attempt to rescue those hostages failed miserably. 8 U.S. troops died in that mission, and none of the hostages at that time were recovered. Now, the 52 remaining American hostages held in Iran were released, as we just said, on 20 January 1981, exactly 444 days after they were captured. The hostages were released just minutes after Ronald Reagan was sworn in as our 40th U.S. president, and most likely because they understood what new leadership meant. Unfortunately, over the decades, Iran has become more defiant, more dangerous, more threatening. It would appear as though the more they got away with, the more emboldened and untouchable they felt. However, in time, along came some of that Reagan-esque new leadership. I'm talking about 47, by the way. They tugged at the tiger's tail. That'd be President Donald J. Trump. The response was swift, measured, and precise, and now it's up to the great population of Iran. They've got to stand up and fight back against what's left of that regime and stop them from propping up yet another supreme leader who would seek nothing more than to dominate and terrorize the region, which in turn would only invite further war. Change things up just a bit, change direction a bit now, and take a gander at China's extremely weak and wishy-washy response to one of their closest allies amid the devastating war in the Middle East. Further showing that they cannot really be trusted when the chips are down, the Chinese Communist regime now says they fully support the right of their traditional friend Iran to defend its sovereignty, security, and national dignity in the face of U.S. and Israeli aggression. Additionally, they're urging our nations to call off our attacks against Tehran before the war spreads further across the entire Middle East. However, despite all their hollow pleas for peace and justice, the Chinese Communist Party is refusing to help out Iran in any concrete way, and experts say that by turning their back on a key ally in their time of need, Beijing is simply showing the entire world how selfish they are, while putting on full display their absolute true colors. Now, some additional headlines we're also keeping a very close watch on here in the News Roundup newsroom. And first up, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, Grandpa Sanders, has just introduced a new bill. That bill would raise $4.4 trillion over the next decade by imposing a 5% wealth tax on nearly 1,000 billionaires right here in the U.S. The lawmaker claims that his measure aims to make the richest Americans pay their fair share of taxes so our country can finally create an economy that works for everyone. And simply read between the lines. That's called rob from the rich and give to the poor. We also call that the Robin Hood syndrome. All right, turning now to a bit of business news. The war in Iran wreaking havoc with world financial markets and the Dow Jones fluctuating wildly throughout the session before closing down slightly, while, as can be expected, oil prices are now beginning to surge. We call that pain at the pump. And it's coming your way. And more important, it's coming my way. Gas in California is more expensive than pretty much everywhere. And moving along, it's anything but sunshine for the Florida citrus industry. According to authorities, this year's brutally cold winter is going to cost their state more than $3 billion in agricultural losses for their ranchers, growers, and farmers. You know, it's a sad day when a 5-ounce cup of orange juice costs more than a gallon of unleaded. All right, scooting along, a quick gander at a bit of showbiz news, and we kick things off today with a follow-up to a tidbit we recently shared with you concerning the disturbing reemergence of nearly unrecognizable Hollywood superstar Jim Carrey. According to reports, fans across the entire planet now extremely worried because the world-famous rubber-faced funny man looks nothing like his former self, and they're now speculating that he's either undergone the knife and had waves of extensive cosmetic surgery, or else he was actually replaced by a body double clone when he accepted his honorary Lifetime Award recently in France.
No, it wasn't me.
Well, look, here's the bottom line. You know, over the weekend, we received hundreds and hundreds of comments, with most folks saying that the person accepting the award was not Jim Carrey at all. Some folks are saying it was a stunt double, a stand-in, a clone, or maybe an AI version of Jim Carrey. Now, look, as the news roundupper in charge, I did some digging over the weekend, some deep research, and I'm here to confirm once and for all that following a well-trusted scientific experiment, I can 100% confirm, 100%, that this was the real Jim Carrey. Now, Editor Pranav, image number 8, please. I've consulted with the Magic 8 Ball, and it confirms that, in fact, the guy at the Caesar Awards was irrefutably the real Jim Carrey. And I'll tell you, the Magic 8 Ball, it never fails. It's science, man. And believe it or not, the world's biggest movie star is now being credited with successfully pulling off his latest Mission Impossible and saving Hollywood from ultimate disaster once again. After helping the entire film industry get back on its feet after the COVID pandemic, insiders now say that the one and only Top Gunner, Tom Cruise, has done it again, this time by becoming irate, stomping his foot down, and preventing the takeover of Warner Brothers by streaming giant Netflix. You know, I might take some exception to that story, as the Tom Cruise that I know, that we all know and love, he doesn't sound like the kind of guy who gets even, well, mildly upset, let alone furious and stomping his foot down. In fact, Editor Pranav, if you have it in the audio vault, let's go to cut number 24, I believe it is, and listen carefully here as Tommy Boy gently encourages the crew on one of his movies to, at all times, do exactly what he needs them to do. Pranav, roll tape.
And anyone on this crew does it. I don't ever want to see it again. Ever. And if you don't do it, you're fired.
Well, maybe he was having an off day that day. And now it is time for us to call it a wrap on the big news roundups. Have an awesome day. Stay safe. If you haven't done so already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button right there. And with that, we're going to dim the lights, fade to black, and we'll see you right back here next time for another episode of the Big News Roundup.